Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It's Thursday, August 13th, 2026, episode 572, and we're going to talk about freedom and wealth. So I was watching a Mike Rowe video or a snippet of Mike Rowe video, and you may recognize the name. He kind of highlights a lot of blue collar work, dirty jobs, for example. But these are all necessary jobs. This is all necessary work. And people have seemed to forgotten about these important jobs that exist in the United States and the world in favor of college education, as if everyone gets a college education, then society will be a better place. However, Mike Rowe's little snippet discussed the fact that 59% of Democrats who support socialism have college degrees and 40% do not. So, 40% of people, Democrats who support socialism, who say they support socialism, do not have college degrees. And then if you look at the Democratic Socialists of America, the DSA, which is basically communism. 80% hold bachelor's degrees, 35% of all of the DSA hold advanced degrees, but blue collar workers are only 4%. So the group of people which claim to want to fight for blue collar workers, not a lot of blue collar workers actually favor or join that kind of organization. And I know why. It's because of a lot of the academic arrogance. Because when you hold a degree, particularly an advanced degree, you start looking down on everyone else as being uneducated, low class, beneath you somehow. So basically, democratic socialists, communists, people who support socialism are miseducated or even indoctrinated, easily manipulated people. On the one hand, they claim diversity, but only permit one perspective. They claim to fight oppression, but identify diverse thinking as oppression. And it's a lot of lazy, sloppy scholarship, which leads to a tremendous amount of hypocrisy. I know because I was in the thick of it. And that basically is what it is. So when all of your professors continually advocate for socialism, one form of socialism or another, or tie all solutions to socialistic solutions, like in the sciences, that might happen. Also, in the sciences, although a lot of professors are not socialists, like they don't even really care, but their funding is the result of socialistic practices. In other words, they have to apply for grants and whatnot, funding through government uh, through government programs, which is all socialistic. So all of us, and I talked about participatory fascism before, that because our system itself is set up to be fascistic, everyone who lives in it is necessarily implicated into that system. And so this whole idea of off the grid is a very difficult thing to achieve. But there are, of course, levels of trying to unplug from the system. So anyway, so there's this idea that socialism is supposed to be for the workers, yet most blue collar workers are not even part of the movement. They're not even part of the leadership. And the reason is because everyone who is, in fact, a diehard socialist poo-poos and looks down on uh, the people, the very people who supposedly they are the champions of. I was watching something else. I can't remember what it was, but I was thinking that the thought came to mind once again that wealth is special, particularly when a society is considered wealthy. It is a very, very special phenomena. And this is a refrain or an idea that comes up frequently in free market apologies, the defense of free market. What I mean by societal wealth is where many people can gain wealth at the same time, not just one individual or one tribe, one section of society, but everyone across the board. And it's something which happens with freedom. And a good example of that would be the 1800s in America. And I know a lot of history books would always talk about, um, child labor, uh, exploitation of workers. But every single example of that, if you look really carefully, you'll see that there is government regulations, government protectionism that's going on, which allows this kind of um, injustice in American history. But overall, with the prevalence of freedom, you see increasing prosperity across the board. In other words, because people are free, they will rarely choose poverty. They will rarely choose an option which will cause them to be worse off. I mean, they might inadvertently do it. They might do it as an accident. They might make a choice out of ignorance and it turned out to be a bad choice. But the lesson is learned, and other people see that phenomena and they avoid the same choice. And that kind of information sharing is a lot faster than people would imagine. Now, people therefore naturally seek to improve their situation wherever there is dissatisfaction. And, now most people will just, make do, get by, like don't even really think about solving problems. They'll just try to, get through the day. But there are those who are obsessed with the things that annoy them. It's a personality trait. I totally get that. Mine came out in through academics and trying to figure out this whole race phenomena. But other people, the things that annoy them and drives them to innovate and create happens, unpredictably. So I'll give you an example. 1966, a guy named Charles Harrison who was working for Sears, Roebuck and Company. He's African American, um, but he was working for Sears, Roebuck, and he was one of those guys that worked in the department where they're coming up with new ideas for products. And he came up with the synthetic garbage can, that is the rubber slash plastic garbage can. And the reason is because all the garbage cans in those days were made out of metal. And when the garbage collectors would come every morning to collect the garbage, they would wake him up because of I don't know if you are old enough to remember, but the metal garbage cans are so loud. They were made out of steel and they were really loud when they were banging around. Particularly since garbage cans were kept in alleys, so there was the echo. It was pretty loud. And they would always wake him up in the morning because the garbage collection happened, at least it would start to happen early, early in the morning. And this so upset him that he tried to figure out how to make a quieter garbage can. And that's what led to all the different kinds of rubberized slash plastic garbage cans that you see today. Now, my argument is that with freedom, that is with no coercion, it leads to wealth. So think about the Vikings, which were all about coercion. They were not wealthy. A lot of people would say, oh, they would rob and pillage. Yeah, but they weren't wealthy because they destroyed wealth. They killed the people who produced the wealth that they would steal, and then they would use up their wealth and then have to go raping and pillaging all over again. And so they were destroying wealth. And it wasn't until they figured this out that they had to settle down and actually become farmers that, things begin to change. And we also have to keep in mind that rules and regulations, more often than not, restrict freedom and they codify danger and obsolescence. They codify that build into law dangerous situations and obsolescence. That is technology that is being phased out is now becomes permanent. And we can see this with the US military when it goes up against a country like Iran, whose military budget is a fraction, I mean, a small microscopic fraction of what the United States spends, right? I think their total annual budget is $10 billion, whereas the um, US budget is what, $1.3 trillion dollars? It's a fraction. And yet the United States is stymied by, the technological advances that Iran has taken advantage of. So rules and regulations lead to corruption and codified obsolescence. And people regress. They start going backwards. And that's why they eventually lose, why empires fall, et cetera, et cetera. So now free trade magnifies the effects of freedom, leads to even more innovation, idea exchange, advancement, development. Okay. Some people might call this, what do you call it? Intellectual theft, people stealing ideas. But that whole concept is weak. In other words, what drives that kind of mentality is people trying to profit off of the ideas that they came up with. They want to claim ownership of that idea as if no one else could come up with the same thing, or that someone would think of something better. Um, right. And so I've talked about this extensively before, particularly with the Wright brothers and Curtis, their whole fight with each other over intellectual property and patents and all this other kind of stuff. But anyway, so free idea exchange leads to even more prosperity. Now, without freedom in trade, it's hard for an individual in a poor society to rise to wealth because everyone is poor. Where is the wealth going to come from? And then so you go back to being Vikings. You steal from other people, but stealing from others just simply leads to even more poverty. So now lazy people, and I will call them socialists, Marxists, communists, or fascists, basically any one of the feather of socialism. Um, they're miseducated, and so they see wealth and they feel guilt, because they were taught to feel it. And so they need to punish it, right? So in all of the various socialisms, especially when you read Marx, there's a lot of jealousy and envy there, particularly, resentment because they don't work. So why are all these other people working really hard, getting all this wealth? It's not fair. Even Bernie Sanders in the 60s was kicked out of communes, socialist, communist communes, because he refused to work. He was like, I'm here to teach. And so they kicked him out. It's like everyone has to pull their weight, especially since they were all farming and it's backbreaking work. And he was like, he refused to do it. So they kicked him out. That's a communist. A communist, a true communist, is someone who doesn't want to work, looks down on the actual labor, looks down on the people who have to do the labor, and just seeks to control all of them and order them around. So within the socialisms, all the various socialisms, there's no creativity, there's no innovation. Everything eventually falls apart because it's just all about wealth transfer. No one knows what to do with the wealth. Most socialists don't even understand what wealth is, where it comes from, and how do you create wealth. All they know is transfer wealth. I'll give you an example of what I mean. A while ago, when Elon Musk, this was years ago, 5 years ago perhaps, when Elon Musk started, rising in wealth in spite of Tesla, but he started rising in his ranking in terms of richest person in the world. And I had some people, in social media who I knew because I taught them. This one guy, he started dating a communist, and so therefore he became a communist, right? Yeah, it's kind of how it goes. But anyway, he was like, "Oh yeah, we should just seize all of his wealth and redistribute it." And I was like, "You guys realize that he doesn't have all this cash in his house, in his bedroom. You realize that." And he had no idea what I was talking about. That if you confiscated his stock shares and just sold them, the values would disappear. And so all of this wealth that people thought he had would disappear. So you can't do that. You can't seize their wealth and, redistribute it. It doesn't work that way. But you have these people who don't even understand how wealth, as it's measured today anyway, works, trying to basically control the rest of society. So there are no new ideas. There's no creative ideas. There's just wealth redistribution. And so everything that they do, any new thing, so-called, that they come up with is just simply a form of wealth transfer, um, all of which has been done before. And so it's very important for them to emphasize that their version of socialism, their socialistic ideas, are new because everything else wasn't really socialism. It's very important for them to learn that, to repeat it. Oh, that's not real socialism. Because everything has already been tried. But thanks to the miseducation, particularly the college miseducation programming that they receive, they like to think that they are groundbreakers. I saw the same phenomena in the Korean church. When I was growing up in the church, there was a time where I was like, oh yeah, no one, this has never been done before. And in a way I was right, but not really, because what is it? 80 years prior, when the first wave of Korean plantation workers came to the United States in the late 1800s, early 1900s, they did the same thing. And I learned that after doing a little bit more research. And it turns out other immigrant groups have tried the same thing as well. So the more you know, the more that your subjectivity is broader, you're allowing yourself to see and learn more of what other people have done and history at the very least. Then you realize that no, it's been done before and it hasn't continued for certain reasons, but everyone wants to believe that they are the hero. And it's easier to believe that you're the hero when you know nothing. Um, and so everyone likes to think that their idea is this groundbreaking new idea, never been tried before, and they're going to save the day. So this is kind of what socialism, all the various socialisms are all about. They claim to have this new solution for the workers. They'll solve all their problems and everything will be great, peaches and cream. But in reality, I think that the core elite of all of these socialisms, they know that they're lying. They claim to be on the side of the worker, but that's because workers, there's so many of them. But the workers themselves are just simply a means to an end. They use and abuse the workers for their own power and wealth. I mean, just look at the unions, last in, first out, right? They're not all treated the same way. You don't protect all of the workers in the same. There are levels of privilege within socialism, within unions. So it's so easy to see, but you don't talk about that. You don't go into depth. You don't go into the detail. You keep everything as superficial as possible so people maintain their belief in that particular brand of socialism, right? You hope that the bubble keeps getting bigger so you can keep the party going so that you can maintain your status and power. If you look at the memes that are out there, socialists in a capitalist society are happy, they're healthy, and then socialists in a socialist society are starving and are crying all the time. So that's the contrast. So people who live in a wealthy society, all they have, feel, and experience is envy and jealousy. And everything they propose is wealth transfer. And so the various different socialistic societies in the world, just where is their socialism? How is it expressed? And, what happens in other parts of society? So one could make the argument, especially after the World Cup soccer, that even in spite of the loss of so much freedom here in the United States, um, we are a little bit better off than a lot of people in Europe. There's a lot more freedom here than there. But obviously, I've talked about this before, but if you compare America to Asian societies, they're just sort of scratching their heads a little bit. But anyway, um, so in as a society loses its freedom, the process is removing the visible signs of difference, that is the wealth. So you make everyone poor. And at the same time, the people who are writing all of the policies and all of the rules are taking all of the wealth. And I've mentioned this before, but if you look in the 80s, who had the cars? Government officials. Who got to ride in planes? Government officials, right? So they get to live lives of luxury, whereas everybody else was just simply living in squalor and poverty. So socialisms, all the various socialisms, they establish systems of control and take away freedom. And that just simply leads to even more control, surveillance, criminalization of everything. I was reminded by all the crazy things happening over in Europe. Someone was given a $500 fine, 500-pound fine for operating a motorized scooter without insurance. Now, I get it. I get it. But there are these kind of ever increasing um, decline of freedom, just being able to do what you want to do. And this increased level of control attracts people who get off on controlling others. And so people who, like the Karens of the world, they seek out these positions of power. And this whole process, this whole increased government control incentivizes, motivates people to see each other as enemies. And freedom and free trade incentivizes looking at each other as trade partners to increase trust. But this kind of society, a socialistic society, increasingly incentivizes people to look at each other as enemies. And clearly, this is the opposite of freedom and free speech, free exchange of ideas. We give all of that up for propaganda, generalizations, caricatures of each other. Now, I'm advocating for freedom, and you might be sitting there saying, well, I don't have any ideas. Yeah, but that's okay. If you live in a free society, someone will be so driven to the point where they will come up with those new ideas and they will share it with everybody and everyone will benefit as a result. It was just sort of this when I was in college, one of my roommates uh, told a lot of bad jokes, but every once in a while he would have a really good joke. And so I joked around with him. I said, I let you talk because even though your jokes are awful, 1 in 1,000 is actually a really fantastic joke. And so, for the sake of hearing that one good joke, I will tolerate all of your bad jokes. And so, in a free society, we allow people to experiment to, on their own dime, right? They pay for the consequences, anything that might happen, that they're responsible for it. And so that means that they'll be really careful. But most of their ideas will be bad ideas, horrible ideas. No one cares about those ideas. But every once in a while, there will be a beauty of an idea that will so revolutionize society, turn it into something that will resolve so many other problems, undo and break apart so many monopolies and so many systems of control. And that's what we want. We want so much innovation that inefficient, bloated government could never keep up with all of the advancement. And soon people will realize just how irrelevant government is for our everyday life. So that's the goal. Just keep in mind freedom, especially as we move forward and things start to fall apart in society. The solution is not more control, but more freedom. That's it for today. I'll talk to you guys next time.